et vita duello, conflixerent mirando, lux vitae mortuus regnat futur.
In this year, dire portents appeared over Northumbria and sorely frightened the people. They consisted of immense whirlwinds and flashes of lightning, and fiery dragons were seen flying in the air.
A scribe records that in the year 793, marauders from the north crossed the sea to England and shattered the peace. Pagans in search of treasure, they surprised the defenseless monastery of Lindisfarne. For Christian Europe, the blackest hour of the Dark Ages was about to strike.
They came to the church, laid everything waste with grievous plundering, trampled the holy places with polluted feet, dug up the altars and seized the treasures. They killed some of the brothers, some they took away with them in fetters, and some they drowned in the sea.
For 300 years, the sight of a Viking longship made Europe tremble, for it carried a fearsome crew, the greatest sailors of their day and the fiercest warriors. From the lands now called Norway, Sweden, and Denmark, young men sought their fortune at sea. Some went in peace to settle new lands. Some went to trade. Some to plunder. In their sagas, Norse poets recorded and embellished the exploits of these seafaring warriors. Men like Olaf the Stout, Ivar the Boneless, Eric Bloodaxe, and Thorfinn the Skull Splitter. And an especially cruel Viking called Egil Skallagrimsson, whose exploits have been handed down across 1,000 years. Egil's father was from Norway, but having backed the wrong side in a dispute, he had been forced to flee to Iceland.
There was plenty of driftwood to be had, so Egil's father built and ran a farm, from where his men went out fishing and seal hunting and collecting the eggs of wildfowl.
Egil was born around 900 AD and raised in a small village. Just a few huts and longhouses. With his family, he lived in one or two windowless rooms, the air hazy with smoke, the walls blackened with soot. An Arab trader from a more civilized land was shocked by some of the Viking customs he witnessed.
Anyone who slaughters an animal by way of sacrifice has a pole outside his house and hangs the sacrificed animal there. I have never heard such horrible singing. It's like a growl coming out of their throats, like the barking of dogs, only much more beastly. If a weak child is born there, it's thrown into the sea to save bringing it up.
Egil was by no means a weak child. Like other boys, he played at war and watched in awe as his elder brothers and his father went off each spring to adventures Egil could only imagine and envy.
It soon became obvious that Egil was going to be just as black-haired and ugly as his father. By the time he was 3 years old, he was as big and strong as a boy of 6 or 7 years. When it came to playing with the other lads, he was a hard one to handle.
The saga records that at the age of 6, Egil lost a competition to a boy called Grim. The humiliation was unbearable.
He ran up to Grim and drove the axe into his head right through to the brain. His mother said that Egil had the makings of a real Viking, and it was obvious that as soon as he was old enough, he ought to be given fighting ships.
In Egil's time, Christianity had not yet worked its way up the fjords of the Norse lands. The Vikings still worshipped a pantheon of gods. Thor rode with the thunder in the sky, and Freya brought fertility to the land. These deities would prove immortal in the form of Thursday and Friday. Warriors charged into battle, shielded by Odin, god of war. A Viking who died on the field joined the fallen heroes before him in Valhalla, a feasting hall of the other world. There he would celebrate his deeds on earth until the day when he would fight and die alongside the gods in mankind's final battle. His destiny already ordained, Egil spent his childhood wrestling, dueling, and hunting, perfecting the makings of a real Viking. Egil impatiently awaited the first sign of spring and the chance to go to sea in a longship and go raiding. An elder brother owned such a ship. When he began to recruit men from the villages, Egil joined him.
In spring, they started preparing a big longship, and as soon as everyone was ready, off they went.
The skill of every warrior would be tested anew in the months at sea. Young Egil himself was embarking on a voyage that would change his life. The word Viking means men of the inlet. As boat builders, these men were unrivaled. By late in the 8th century, when the Vikings swept down upon the monks at Lindisfarne, the Scandinavians had developed a craft that would change history. Whether 60 feet long or 120, a warship's keel was carved from the stout trunk of a single oak. With a broad hull and a shallow draft, such ships penetrated far upriver and could be beached almost anywhere. Water, usually a barrier that kept enemies at bay, became for the Vikings a highway to invasion. To them, their vessel was a creature unto itself. They gave it names like Long Serpent and Raven of the Wind. Christian monks indeed saw snakes and dragons flying through the air. Overlapping planks of oak or pine were nailed, pinned, or lashed to the hull. The planks were caulked with tarred animal hair. In rough seas or rainstorms, the ships remained watertight. Under sail, these ships could make 10 knots. Against the swift longship, there was no defense, for the Vikings had mastered not only the element of water, but of surprise. A French monk lamented,
"The Vikings overrun all that lies before them, and none can withstand them."
Before long, Egil had risen to command his own ship.
Once it was manned, they went plundering that summer in the Baltic.
During long stretches at sea, Egil and his crew would pass the time playing board games, such as Capture the King. In their sea chests, the men also carried a number of personal items, not the least their combs.
English women appreciated the Nordic men because they combed their hair, washed every Saturday, and changed clothes often.
After making many raids and winning a great deal of loot, Egil sailed into the Baltic to Courland, in what is now Latvia. For 2 weeks, he and his shipmates traded peacefully. Just as suddenly, Egil changed tack and sailed away to resume plundering.
One day, Egil and his comrades put in near a large estuary that lay beneath a vast area of forest. They decided to go ashore and divide into groups, each of them 12 strong.
The men took up their weapons and headed inland. Egil carried an iron sword more than 3 feet long called Adder, a sleek serpent that unleashed death whenever it struck. It was light enough to wield in one hand, but strong enough that it would not shatter against a shield. Like most Vikings, Egil prized this weapon above all others. Some swords were thought magical, made by dwarves, or bestowed by Odin, god of war. In poetry, the blade was celebrated as the fire of battle and the lightning flash of blood. The poorer members of Egil's crew carried a short battle axe, simple but deadly.
He swung his axe and crashed down on Thrain's head, splitting it down to the jaws and spilling his back teeth onto the ice.
Warriors who could afford to wore an iron helmet, which, despite legend, was never horned. The wealthy girded themselves with mail, made of thousands of interlocking links. And every warrior carried a round wooden shield. The most feared Vikings, even amongst their own comrades, were the legendary berserkers, or bearskins. Named for the bear or wolf skins they wore, these men were endowed with gifts from the gods, powers thought to blunt swords and stop the flight of javelins. From these fanatical warriors, we have the word berserk.
Egil had walked through the forest with his 12 men. Not far away was a farmstead, so they made for it. and on reaching it, they charged into the building. I've borne the blood-stained sword and bitter spear shaft, the raven at my right hand. As we raiders strove forward, burning for battle, we made their barns blaze. Gory at their gates groaned those fast sleepers.
The slumbering farmers were killed in their beds, their possessions looted.
Each man gathered his own load and carried it out. Egil picked up a big jewel case, and with that under his arm, he went with his men towards the wood.
Egil's ship continued on its trail of terror.
Late in the summer, they sailed for Denmark to lie in wait for trading vessels and plunder wherever they could.
So it went, stealing treasures of silver and gold from helpless monasteries and taking slaves from coastal villages. But having amassed great wealth, Viking raiders sometimes chose not to fight, but trade. Treasure and slaves could be bartered for Mediterranean wines, Eastern spices, and Persian leather.
Their most valuable ornaments are ceramic beads, which are kept on the ships. They bargain for them, put them on a chain, and give them to their women as necklaces.
As traders and seafarers, the Vikings left their mark throughout Europe. Russia owes its name to Norse traders called Rus. Normandy, too, was settled by the men from the north. Settlements abroad grew. Vikings brought their families from across the sea and created towns like Kiev and Dublin. Journeying far to the east, Viking mercenaries formed a bodyguard to the Christian emperor of Byzantium. Inside the Hagia Sophia Mosque in Istanbul, a bit of graffiti proclaims, "Halfdan was here." Most daring of all, the Vikings are believed the first Europeans to have crossed the Atlantic, predating Columbus by 500 years. For Egil, the spoils of battle were plenty, silver, gold, and slaves. But rather than savoring his plunder, he was lured back to sea by the thrill of the raid. As generations of Vikings descended upon the coast of Europe, their reputation spread far inland. When the King of Scotland declared war against the King of England, England's Athelstan sought help from the very Norsemen who had raided his shores. One of his mercenaries was Egil. Because England was a Christian country, Egil first had to be baptized. Then, with 360 fellow Vikings under his command, he joined the English king. Athelstan challenged his opponent to a pitched battle.
It was the custom in those days that once a field of battle had been declared for a king, he could not honorably wage war until the battle had been fought.
At the appointed time, both armies engaged.
Egil marched ahead, urging them forward and brandishing the sword adder, striding in front and hewing men down left and right. He led the men into the thick of the battle, pressing forward.
Egil recorded such battles in poetry.
The warlord weaves his web of fear. Each man receives his fated share. A blood-red sun's the warrior's shield. The eagle scans the battlefield. Then Egil and his troops caused utter havoc by attacking the Scottish king's unguarded flank. The whole column gave way and began to disintegrate, and the Vikings raised the cry of victory.
Toward the end of Egil's life, the Vikings once more came to England. Not in a single longship, but in fleets of almost 100. Not to aid the king, but to conquer his lands. For this race of warriors, death came early through disease or battle. The warrior would be buried with his weapons and perhaps a prize horse or a favored slave girl. His grave would be outlined by stones in the shape of a longship, the vessel that would carry him to the next world. A few might be honored with a monument alongside a footpath. Large stones, marked with inscriptions, would proclaim their deeds. The greatest warriors received the highest honor of all, a boat burial, provisioned with riches for the journey to Valhalla. For Egil, death came slowly.
I flounder by the fireside, ask females for mercy. Time passes tediously. I tarry here alone, an old, senile elder.
For the Viking way of life, too, death came at last. Old victims had grown strong, and old enemies had become friends. The Norsemen in Normandy, even the Danes in Denmark, would become strangers to men like Egil. By the 12th century, Christian Europe had quietly absorbed this race of warriors. With the passing of the Vikings, no more would dragons be seen flying in the sky. No more would good Christians have need to whisper their prayer of 300 years. From the fury of the Northmen, good Lord, deliver us.